Hi everyone. I would like to try something less formal today. On my website, I usually go with articles or YouTube videos that are fairly detailed, so the topics that are discussed are not misunderstood, or at least I can make myself as clear as possible. However, there are also some topics where I don't think this level of formality is required, and this will be one of them. So today I'd like to talk about the psychological interpretation of the movie Fight Club. I expect from now on that the people who will listen to that have seen the movie or even maybe read the book, because it initially was a book, and if you haven't, go watch it. There's no point listening to this without having watched the movie. Alright, so imagining that Fight Club is quite fresh in your memory, what is this movie about? I would like to propose that, at least in a psychological manner, Fight Club is the story of a masculine ego that moves from boyhood to manhood. And the movie is revolving around the initiation rituals necessary for boys to become men in a modern society. See, how does a girl becomes a woman? It's usually accepted that this is done when the girl gets her period. In other words, this is a very biologically driven process. There's no need to intervene forcefully, but boys are not like that. Boys do not grow older just because time passes by, just because biology develops. Boys need to be initiated into men. This is a knowledge that tribal people know about. This is a knowledge that some people remember deep at their core, but it's a knowledge that has been lost in society. What I mean by that is most boys who go through society these days, whether it is school, university, even stuff like military, they won't get that initiation ritual that will transform them into men. The anthropological language for that is saying that there's no more liminal space in our society. Everything has been softened or made safe because of various reasons that's not worth investigating. Essentially, a liminal space, a sacred space, is a space into which you step into as if you were crossing a threshold. You experience a high degree of disorientation, and then with the help of a ritual elder, you're brought back to normal everyday reality. And the purpose of that is to experience life without this safety net, to experience life more fully, but also mean completely disoriented. So my thesis here is that Fight Club is such a liminal space for masculine initiation, and the rules around it are carefully crafted to reflect all of that. Let's look at the 8 rules of Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. As you can see here, we're sealing a container. We're creating a sacred space that is at the margin of reality. It's not meant to be contaminated with the experience of day-to-day life. It's a special place, and what happened in Fight Club remains in Fight Club. You can think about it in the way that the therapeutic relation takes place. When you go to therapy, what you share in therapy is not meant to come out of therapy. It's shared with a professional and it remains there. Well, Fight Club is something like that. Then the third rule of Fight Club, someone yells stop, goes limp, taps out, the fight is over. Here, now that we've sealed the container, we establish a limit to the numinosity of aggression. Because Fight Club is a place to develop aggression, to become familiar with it, to put skin in the game, to experience the disorientation without the usual barriers or safety net. But we still need to contain the aggression. We still need to make sure that a limit is not crossed. Fourth rule, only 2 guys to a fight. Fifth rule, 1 fight at a time. Sixth rule, no shirts, no shoes. Those are additional rules to limit the chaos. So when you design a sacred space, you want to experience disorientation, but you don't want to invite all the chaos. That would be too much. So only 2 guys, only 1 fight, and the fight must be fair. No shirt, no shoes. We're getting primal. The 7th rule is fights will go on as long as they have to. This means that the struggle should be played out till the end. See, a lot of people are conflict adverse, and so you bring the conflict and they'll flee. What Fight Club says is that if you bring the conflict, you stay till the end, till a resolution. You play fair until something happens. You let the conflict unfold to the end. And this is a very mature way to deal with conflict, because maturity is really when things become tough, do you stay or do you leave? And so a mature person wants the thing to reach a conclusion. And the last rule is, if this is your first night at Fight Club, you have to fight. This really means that there should not be any voyeurism. You have to have skin in the game, and if you enter the space, you'll be committed to experience the disorientation. This is not a place to talk. This is not a place to chat. This is a place to experience firsthand. So this is how well Fight Club is designed as a sacred space for masculine initiation. All the rules are important so that we can become familiar with stuff that's not accepted in our society, such as aggression. This method of development is opposed to a few things in the movie. It's opposed to materialism, the idea that one can feel complete if we buy the right things, to consumerism, where one is only an agent of what we consume, to also a form of maternal development. There is this quote that I'm a 30-year-old boy, and Tyler says, we're a generation of men raised by women. I'm wondering if another woman is really the answer we need. There's a case to be made about how necessary it is to find your own emotion first. This is what happens to the narrator. He goes to those support group to find his tears again by seeing other cry. So by seeing other people's emotion, he can find his own. But this is only a very temporary phase, and it's not enough to help him mature. And it's also opposed to self-improvement. Tyler says that this is more a form of self-destruction. Why? Because once you experience the disorientation of a sacred space, especially one that's dealing with aggression, no amount of social politeness, sophisticated arguments, complex worldview can survive a direct confrontation with something like a fight. And when you experience real pain, everything else fades away in comparison. The next level of Fight Club is to develop into what's called Project Mayhem. And you can think about this as Fight Club going from a personal dimension to a collective dimension. The modus operandi of Project Mayhem is not much different from Fight Club. It's via negativa. It's a way of subtracting what's artificial or shallow. In other words, to create a certain amount of chaos, destruction, and discomfort that forces people and collective structures to collapse or become more real. So that's the story of Fight Club. It's the story of Nigo, the narrator, that is depressed, that is uninitiated. It's a 30-year-old boy looking for an escape. And he founds it by coming in contact with Tyler, who is obviously his shadow. And by relating to the shadow, he enters a sacred space in which he struggles with himself and get rid of all the niceties, all the social things he has learned. All of that gets taken away for a stronger, more ruthless aspect of his personality to be harnessed and fully developed. By doing that, this development through the shadow, the narrator starts to also establish a relationship with Marla, which is made sexually explicit. And here we gather a very important insight that you'll find in analytical psychology, is that the anima is friendly towards the shadow more than the ego. There are qualities in the shadow, in the inferior nature of the ego, that the anima prefer to the ego. The obvious one in the movie is that the sexuality of Tyler is much more preferable than the sexuality of the narrator. But as the movie goes on, at some point, the narrator has lost Tyler, which means he has lost a certain identification he had, and is able to apologize to Marla, to relate to the feminine in a way that is not infantile anymore. So we could say that the process of initiation has been successful, and the narrator has finally become an initiated man without being possessed by the shadow, without being possessed by Tyler. The narrator is now finally man enough to deal with the anima. This happens at the moment where the banks are being destroyed by Project Mayhem, and you can understand that psychologically, if the ego is initiated and becomes strong enough and reliable enough and autonomous enough to relate to the feminine, then a bunch of overarching structures can be deconstructed, because now there is less need for controlling structures for the ego to thrive on. All in all, Fight Club is a deeply engaging movie that hasn't lost its edge despite being more than 20 years old. It's still compelling to watch, and what it proposes is still valid as of today. I would make the case that Fight Club is the follow-up to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. At the collective level, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde propose the thing that man is double, that there is such a thing as a double-faced man, which is man in his shadow. And Fight Club has, I would say, cemented this thing that not only there is a shadow, but a relationship is possible to develop from a boy to a man. Having said that, from my personal experience and from a therapeutic standpoint, there is a lot to criticize about Fight Club. The first one is there's way too much identification of the ego with the shadow. What this means is that the ego loses himself into the ways of the shadow, and many times he crosses a line in his development. This line of development is way too destructive and creates a great deal of harm. And so what the movie is missing, though it comes back at the end, is a form of humanization of this line of development. If you want to see the same movie as Fight Club, but without this shock value and destructiveness, I can recommend Three Colors White by director Krzysztof Kieslowski. And you'll find the exact same storyline of an uninitiated man who cannot relate to the feminine and has to go through this journey where he flirts with crime and violence to become a fully mature, responsible man who can finally relate emotionally and sexually to the feminine. On a more personal level, for someone who's practiced shadow work, I've been trying to find a medium that would represent what I would call integrative shadow work, where the exchange between the ego and the shadow is productive. And I'm not fully satisfied with what Fight Club is presenting. I would much prefer to orient people towards something like Neon Genesis Evangelion, because in episode 16 there's an internal confrontation and back and forth between the ego of Shinji and the shadow of Shinji is much closer to a positive, integrated exchange that I've personally experienced. So to conclude, as much as I appreciate what Fight Club is doing for the collective, I still withhold some reservation about recommending it as a way to understand a productive relationship between the ego and the shadow. I suppose this is all I wanted to say, and I hope you've learned something out of it, and maybe I'll do more of this in the future. Take care, everyone.